Sobat Ikonik, tadi baru saja kita sudah mengikuti opening ceremony dari Ikonik 2020. Nah, sesaat lagi kita akan bersama-sama mengikuti plenary session yang pertama dengan topik Dynamic Digital Society and Culture yang nantinya akan dipandu oleh Dr. Vera Syamsi. Nah, pada plenary session nantinya kita akan berdiskusi bersama dua narasumber yang pastinya luar biasa dalam bidangnya masing-masing. Nanti di plenary session yang pertama ini kita akan berdiskusi bersama dengan Ibu Inaya Rahmani Esos, MA PhD, dan Dr. Miguel Escobar Varela yang nantinya akan diperkenalkan lebih lanjut dengan oleh Dr. Vera Syamsi. Tapi sebelumnya kita sapa dulu nih Ibu Vera. Halo Ibu Vera, bisa mendengar suara saya?
Halo, ya, selamat pagi. Bisa kedengaran suara saya?
Selamat pagi, Ibu Vera. Sudah bisa terhubung dengan kami?
Ya, halo.
Untuk bisa terhubung dengan Ibu Vera, ini kami mengingatkan Sobat Ikonik nih, bahwa nanti setelah plenary session ini akan ada panel discussion dan juga akan ada sesi tanya jawab. Jadi Sobat Ikonik bisa mempersiapkan pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang boleh ditanyakan ke narasumber pada plenary session yang pertama. Nah, nanti bisa dalam bahasa Inggris, bisa dalam bahasa Indonesia, bebas. Jadi pokoknya bebas saja untuk bertanya, mempersiapkan pertanyaan, atau juga mau menyampaikan sesuatu, boleh saja nanti disampaikan setelah plenary session, karena nanti akan ada sesi tanya jawab. Nah, jangan lupa untuk menyiapkan, karena nanti juga akan ada hadiah juga dari kami untuk penanya yang terbaik. Jadi ikuti baik-baik setiap setiap sharing session dari narasumber nanti, dan siap-siap untuk bertanya di sesi tanya jawab. Nah, terus nanti jangan lupa teman-teman untuk bisa mengikuti ada panel session juga, ada beberapa panel room yang akan disediakan. Jadi nanti teman-teman akan disediakan link ya, link untuk join setiap panel. Nanti teman-teman juga bisa melihat video dari presenter-presenter yang akan menampilkan presentasinya di panel room. Nanti teman-teman bisa search di YouTube-nya Ikonik Culture. Nanti ketik aja akun Ikonik Culture dan teman-teman bakal bisa melihat video presentasi dari teman-teman yang akan mempresentasikan insights-nya di panel session nanti. Apa sudah bisa terhubung dengan Dr. Vera?
Halo, selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi, Dr. Vera. Apa kabar?
Selamat pagi. Bisa terdengar ya suara saya ya?
Sangat terdengar, Ibu.
Ya. Tadi saya sempat nggak bisa mendengar soalnya. Oke, baik.
Oke. Sudah siap panel session yang pertama, Ibu Vera?
Iya, siap.
Oke, kalau begitu saya serahkan sesi plenary session yang pertama kepada Ibu Vera. Silakan Ibu Vera.
Iya, terima kasih. Selamat pagi Bapak dan Ibu sekalian. Senang sekali saya bisa memulai sesi ini. Jadi pada sesi plenar yang pertama kita akan mendengarkan presentasi dari dua pembicara yang tentu saja hebat-hebat. Yang pertama adalah Dr. Miguel Escobar Varela, lalu yang kedua adalah Dr. Inaya Rahmani. Please allow me to read the CV of Dr. Miguel Escobar. Bapak Miguel Escobar Varela PhD adalah pengaji teater, penerjemah, dan pembuat website. Dalam penelitiannya, dia menggunakan media digital untuk meneliti budaya Jawa. Jadi Bapak Varela ini kemungkinan besar bahasa Indonesianya sangat lancar dan bahasa Jawanya juga barangkali bagus. Ya. Saat ini beliau bekerja sebagai dosen dan penasihat proyek digital di Universitas Nasional Singapura atau NUS. Dia membimbing arsip wayang kontemporer dan dapat diakses pada website yang yaitu cwaweb.org. Tulisannya telah diterbitkan di beberapa jurnal akademik, serta daftar tulisan dan berbagai proyek webnya bisa diakses pada miguelescobar.com. Baiklah, sekarang saya persilahkan Pak Miguel Escobar untuk menyampaikan presentasinya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Escobar Varela. I'm assistant professor at the National University of Singapore, and it's my great pleasure to be here with you online, sharing something about the work that I've been doing on digital humanities and Javanese theater. I've been asked to address you in English, but I hope you will allow me to just say a few words in Indonesian. Jadi, pertama-tama saya ingin berterima kasih pihak penyelenggara konferensi ikonik, dan meskipun kita semua tidak bisa bertemu secara tatap muka, saya pikir konferensi ini sangat penting, dan saya senang secara daring kami masih bisa membahas kebudayaan Indonesia. So I will be sharing a few websites and projects that are all accessible from my own homepage. So in case anybody is interested, you can go to my Twitter handle, which will be displayed in the slides that follow. And from there, you can find the links to the videos and the websites I'll be discussing here. The image that you see here is a photograph of a performance of wayang kulit, which is an extraordinary art form that I've been studying for a few years. And that is incredible for a variety of reasons. One of them is that it has an extremely long history. It goes back at least 1,000 years, perhaps longer. And in many ways, it's one of the most important Javanese traditions of the performing arts. Sometimes when we share images about wayang, we see photographs like the one that I'm sharing with you at the moment that is zoomed in, where you can see the puppets here, the shadows that they cast. And in this case, you see the dalang, that's the puppeteer, and his assistant. But often what you don't see in these zoomed in images is all the technology that surrounds this performance. So for example, this photograph was taken at the exact same location, the exact same performance as the previous photograph. But what you can see here is that there are these screens that are simultaneously transmitting the performance to the audience that is sitting on the side. And sometimes throughout the entire village where a particular performance is sponsored, you could also see elsewhere these screens that show this simultaneous transmission of the performance. This particular photograph, I took it around 3 a.m. So some of the spectators had already left by that time. But if you had been here a bit earlier, you would see many people sitting on the floor and enjoying this performance, even though the performance is live at the same location. If you were to walk down the street, maybe a few hundred meters, you would see the actual live performance. But there are so many people there, not everyone can see that technology is being used today, even in the most traditional of performances. So in my work, I'm interested in two things. One is how technology is changing how we think about performances, but also how the artists, the dalang in this case, are using technology, even in cases where the performance is still traditional. I'll show you some other examples later where the actual form has changed to adapt to new technology. So one of the things that I started doing a few years ago together with my collaborators in Indonesia was to also track the places with the most performances today. So what you see here is a map. This is called a choropleth or a heat map, where you can see the different kabupaten, the different districts of in Java. And you can see that the deeper the shade of blue, the more performances there would be. So in many cases, this shouldn't be a surprise. You would see that in the special region of Yogyakarta, that is around here, or the area around Greater Solo, there are lots and lots of performances. But we also found that there's this hotspot around Cilacap, Banyumas, Kebumen, and Ciamis that is not often talked about. So one of the things that we want to show with this project is that academic attention tends to be focused more often than not on the traditions of Jogja and Solo. I am myself guilty of that omission, because I also tend to speak mostly about those places. But when we collected all these mentions to performances from the internet and social media, we realized that a lot of things are happening also in this understudied region. One caveat of this kind of methods, one limitation, is that we can only show that which is available online. So there might be some omissions in our data. I worked also with some research assistants where we try to verify many of the things that we found online and also try to estimate how much we miss. So we think that there's perhaps between 10 and 15% of the performances that are happening daily that we don't really see. There are performances happening in faraway locations that don't get any mention on social media. So in some cases, the data that you see here is not a complete, accurate representation of what happens on the ground. But you see a different kind of scale where we have thousands of performances that are being brought together into this map. Another thing that we do is, as you can see on this animated map over here, is that you can see how they change over time. And now I'm showing you data only for 3 years. We actually have data also for the past 2 years. We started in 2016. And you can see that the number of performances is remarkably stable over time. So on a given day, there will be between 10 and 20 performances. And this follows a pattern throughout the year. So during Ramadan, the fasting month, there can only be ritual performances. So there's a bit of a dip in the number of performances. And then in August, of course, for, 17 for the anniversary of the Indonesian independence, there will be a lot more performances. And also towards the end of the year, where we have like the beginning of the Suro, like the beginning of the Islamic calendar, you would see a lot of performances that are also happening around this time, especially a lot of ritual performances for the cleansing of a village. So you can see they don't match exactly the same month every year, because the lunar calendar is slightly different from time to time, but we see these patterns that change from one year to the next. And one thing that I'm interested in doing here is to really think of the scale of performances. So the kinds of things that we can learn from all the things people are saying on social media about performances in Java. Another thing that we can do is we can look at what people are searching for. So as some of you might know, Google, the search engine, publishes data on trends. So here we can see what people are searching for. So if you go to google.com/trends, you can actually see data for a specified amount of time of what users are searching for. In this case, I specified the search term wayang kulit only for Indonesia. So this is the amount of people that are, sorry, apologies for that. What you can see over here is the amount of people that are searching for the term wayang kulit in Indonesia, using the Google search engine over time from 2014 to 2019. And you can see also these trends over time that actually correspond to what I showed you in the image before. So I'm not going to go into the analysis here, but we see some correspondence between these mentions on social media and what people are actually searching for. So you can see that there's this pattern over time of how people are searching for wayang kulit. Of course, now in 2020, sadly, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, many performances had to be shifted online. So since April, we haven't been able to really have a lot of performances live, but people are still searching for performances on YouTube. And that's data that we'll try to analyze again in the future. Here you can see the amount of people that are searching for the term wayang kulit on YouTube only in Indonesia. And you can see here that the trend is going a little bit above or over time. Now, one thing here is that we don't know why people are searching for wayang kulit. So is it really because they want to know more about it? Do they not want to know where a performance is taking place? Or maybe they don't know what it is. That could also be the case, that this indicates actually that people don't know about it and they want to figure out what wayang kulit is. But my intuition was that actually people are using this to find performances. So they want to know when a performance is taking place. So we can further refine this search data, and we can look for the word jadwal, which as those of you who speak Indonesian in the audience know, means it's the timetable, it's the schedule. So you can know when performances are taking place. So the assumption is that when somebody's looking for the schedule is because they actually want to go and see a wayang kulit show. And one thing that we've seen from other sources of evidence is that many famous dalangs now have this large following of people who would, are willing to travel to another place, to another city or another village to see their performances. So here you can see that there's this interest over time that has changed from 2014 to 2019. So even if you cannot see if the legend here of the horizontal axis is not clear, you can actually go to Google Trends and find this for yourself. You just need to search, enter the term Jadwal Wayang Kulit, and you would see these search data over time. But then again, what you can see here is that it goes from 0 to 100. So that means that it takes the largest amount of data as the maximum point and then divides everything by that amount. So in some ways, we actually don't know exactly how much people are searching for this. And we wanted to find a comparison. So when we started this a couple of years ago, Game of Thrones was extremely famous, even in Indonesia. And we wanted to see how many people are searching for, Jadwal Wayang Kulit versus Jadwal Game of Thrones. And you can see here the red line, that's the one for the schedule of Game of Thrones. It's always lesser than Wayang. So there are more people interested in when Wayang Kulit is taking place and when Game of Thrones is taking place, except towards the very end. So this is in 2019, early in the year, where a lot of people actually searched for Game of Thrones, in part because it was the end of the season, but also because Pak Jokowi, the president of Indonesia, made a reference also to Game of Thrones in a political event in an ASEAN meeting. But so you can see over there, really the red trend overtakes Wayang Kulit. But overall, what we can see from this is that people who are using the internet are using it also to find about Wayang. So that's kind of one part of what I want to talk about, which is how we can use data from the internet to understand how the audience, how the users are thinking about this tradition. But I'm also personally interested in how artists are modifying the tradition and are combining elements of this very old history with new sources of culture, for example, popular culture. And one example that I want to talk about briefly is a performance called Wayang Hip Hop, which, as the name suggests, is a performance where the artist combines the conventions of music, of the puppet construction from Wayang and also from hip hop music. So here, for example, I'll just show you one example. This is one of the Punokawan, or the clown puppets. This one is called Petruk in the tradition. And here you can see that he's been reimagined as Patrick with a global sounding name, and the way he's dressed indicates that he's this urban youngster. But there is some features like the type of nose, the face, that you can see it still maintains some of that traditional conventions. And you can see here the image in full. This is the work of Ki Catur Banyak Kunchoro, a very well-known dalang from Yogyakarta. And you can see a full-length recording, so the entire video of Wayang Hip Hop here at the Arsip Wayang Contemporer, or Contemporary Wayang Archive. This is a free video library with translations and notes. So you can see his work and the work of many other people who are interested in combining the tradition with new sources of inspiration. And one other thing that I did when analyzing this project was that I went to I talked to a variety of people. I talked to spectators, I talked to artists, I talked to sponsors, and through those conversations, they explained to me the different dimensions along which Wayang is adapted. So the diagram that you see here is my interpretation of the conversations that I had with people. So I understood from them that the main things that contemporary Wayang does, the main areas where innovation takes place are the language, the puppets, the story, the space, and the music. So then what I did is I classified each of these dimensions for every performance. So what you can see here is my representation of Ki Catur Banyak Kunchoro's Wayang Hip Hop. And in this diagram, this is called a radial chart. So you see these three areas. So everything that is at the center would be a completely traditional show. Then you see this other circle that would be something in between, and the outermost circle is something that is extremely contemporary. So this is my interpretation based on my conversations with people, and other people might disagree with the way I classify these performances, but you can see how this comes together in a website I will show you in a minute. So the idea here is that, in my opinion, this is still close to a traditional use of the language because it's still in Javanese, whereas you see many other performances that use a combination of Javanese and Indonesian, or even English and other languages. The puppets, as I showed you a moment ago, are here. They're in between, because even though they are a new take on the Punokawan, you can still see some features of Petruk. The story is also somewhere in between the tradition and innovation. The space is also somewhere in between, and the same thing is true for the music that combines not only hip hop, but also many of the conventions of the way in which, for example, the Dalang sings. So you have these suruan, like, the way in which the Dalang sings during a performance that are still retained in this performance. So in order to illustrate this, I created this, this website that you can see interactively here. So here you see, again, you see the Punokawan explain to you how to use the website. And you can select, for example, from here, any of the performances like the one I showed you. This is the one on Wayang hip hop. And you can see here that this diagram is loaded interactively. And you can choose other performances so you can see how they are different along these dimensions. And if you think this is interesting, I encourage you to come to this website, play with it. And then you can actually, if you put the mouse over, even if you cannot see it now on your screens, here is an explanation of why I decided to classify, say, the puppets as being in between. But if you want to know more about that, you can also just click here on puppets. And then on this panel, you get to see a longer description where I justify my interpretation of these choices. And in many cases, you also, if you go to music, for example, you would also see here some excerpts of the music together with my explanation. So this is a multimedia essay. There are other cases, just to show you a comparison, where this is from Eko Nugroho. This is called Preseteruan Getah Pening, also a type of contemporary wayang, where this invention of the new puppets, as you can see here, doesn't really have anything to do with the tradition. They are still recognizable as wayang puppets because of the way the control sticks are inserted onto the puppet, but the images in this case are surreal, and they have no real connection to Petruk or Narodo or any of the other characters of the wayang tradition. So in the website, as I showed you a moment ago, you can see these interactive essays. And this is just a representation of all the diagrams that I made for all the 24 performances that I analyzed. I want to show you a couple of other projects that I've done. This one is a wayang kulit encyclopedia, a digital encyclopedia. And the objective of this project was to take a list of common stories and then construct a social network of these puppets. So one way you can think about this is that it's a bit like a Facebook of wayang kulit characters. But in this case, the link between two characters is something that we call the co-occurrence. So that means if you have two characters that are in the same scene, so for example, you often have Semar, who is the fighter of the clown puppets, and Petruk together in the same scene. So each of these will be represented as a node, and there will be an edge or a link, a line connecting them. So you can go to an interactive version of this website here, and you can see, you can click on any of the puppets. You can then see a full description. And one thing that we've tried to do here is to include a lot of data on each of the puppets. So you can see a very short description of how the character is presented in the Javanese version of the stories, a comparison sometimes to the kinds of versions of the stories you would find in India and South Asia. Here you see some lakon, so that would be, a lakon would be like one story that is presented in a overall one night long wayang kulit performance. So for example, here you can click on Dewa Ruchi, that is a very well-known lakon, and you can see here this blow-by-blow description. So in each scene, you can see where the like the characters that are involved. So we call this a balungan or a skeleton. So this is a skeleton of the story for one night. And here you can also see this graph over here that shows you the network of puppets, but only for this one story. Whereas the one I showed you at the beginning is for the entire collection of all the stories. Here you can also
Varela, sorry, you have 5 minutes left, yeah? Sorry.
like the silsila. So this is like who are the parents, the siblings, and the spouses of each of the characters. More information, and very importantly, all the sources. So there are competing versions of many of these characters, and these are all the Wayang.
Sorry, excuse me, because it's a pre-recorded video, so it will need to be stopped directly from your side.
So this is the characters that are most likely to appear in the same scene.
Oh, okay.
One. So Huercutoro is the character most likely to be in the same scene as Cresno, which is the one we're seeing now. And you can also go here to Huercutoro and see the same level of information for this character and for all of them. And you can also use the search bar here to find out more information about these characters. We have this contemporary Wayang archive that I've already described in a moment, but this is just how so you can see how it looks. So here you have these 24 performances. We have notes on the performance, translations. If the performance is in Javanese, it's also been translated into Indonesian. And for all cases, we have performances, the translation into English. And you can find these at cwa-web.org, or you can find the link through my Twitter handle, which is Miguel Jogja. Another project that I want to describe briefly is a philological edition of a Wayang Kulit performance. So this is based on a book by Professor Bernard Erbs, who is also in this conference. I believe he's also one of the presenters here at Iconic Conference. So based on his book that you can see here, it's an incredibly detailed translation of a performance of Tewuruchi by Kianom Suroto that has a, even if you cannot see it in detail here, he has the original in Japanese, the translation into English with a lot of notes and images. So this was first produced as a book, but then in collaboration with him, what we did was we did an interactive version of this particular performance. Sorry, I'm moving around the Zoom controls. And what you can see here is that this is all based on the work of Professor Erbs. And you can see the performance, the original language and the translation, and this is synchronized to a video. So while you can go and get the video, the actual book, I'm going to play and hopefully this will work. So I'm just showing you how you can actually jump around and see the synchronized part of the dialogue here in the video. This is based on this incredible work of Professor Erbs, who translated and added also all these notes. So you can see the notes are incredibly detailed for every term of the performance. And we then made an interactive version of that book, which is freely available for anybody who's interested. And here you can see a screenshot of how that looks like. Another project I want to describe that you can also find on the links. This is a project that we did for a museum, for the Art Science Museum here in Singapore. So this is called a tangible interface. And the idea is that people who come to the museum, they themselves learn to become a dalang. So we have these different puppets. We have here the bog, which is like the banana trunk. But what's unique about our interface is that we have sensors. So we have different kinds of sensors to detect rotation, to detect also when you put the puppets in different parts of the bog. So the idea is that you come here, like you see here, a kid that is visiting this exhibition. And then when you come here, you yourself become a dalang. So the interface teaches you the meaning of certain puppets. So for example, this puppet over here called the Cayon, as some of you know, has a lot of really important meanings in a performance. So not only is it full of symbolic meaning, but it has dramatic meaning. So for example, usually the dalang would lift it, rotate it, and place it on the side to indicate scene changes. So the idea here is that you come here, you rotate the puppet, and the puppet itself has a sensor, which is the same kind of sensor that your hand phone has. So you know how sometimes your hand phone can detect if you rotate it, if you move it horizontally or vertical. So we use that kind of sensor. So it knows when you rotate the cajon, you put it on the side. And in that way, the people who visit this exhibition learn the conventions of wayang. And also here you see the kotak. This is like the box where usually the dalang would use a tempolo, which is a wooden mallet, to knock onto this puppet box. And through a rhythmical pattern, he would also cue the musicians that are sitting behind him in order to begin, accelerate, or stop the musical accompaniment. And we created this system that actually can recognize this knocking. So you learn also how the dalang is controlling the pace of the performance and communicating with the musicians. And the last project I want to talk to you about is a collaboration with the Yale Art Gallery and with Professor Matthew Cohen from the University of Connecticut. So in the Wayang encyclopedia I showed you a moment ago, one thing we don't have is the images, in part because there are many possible images of one puppet and we didn't want to select just one image. But working with this incredible project at Yale University, this is what we're doing at the moment is, let me just move the Zoom thing here. This is based on the Walter Angst collection of Indonesian puppets, which is currently at Yale Art Gallery. And you can click here on the image of different puppets. And this collection, the Walter Angst collection, has 20,000 puppets, give or take. And one thing that is special about this is that you have puppets from different regions. So sometimes you have the Surakarta version of the puppet, the Yogyakarta version of the puppet. You have some that are very old that go back to the 19th century, and some things that were just made in the early 21st century. So it's incredibly diverse. This is just a prototype. But the idea is that here you would be able to load any of these 20,000 images. You can also, by clicking the mouse, you can rotate it. You can also decrease the transparency, so you can overlay them. And if you click on these ones, you get more information about these puppets. And this is linked to the digital Wayang encyclopedia that I showed you a moment ago. So you can see more about the character that is represented by that puppet. So that's, that is the end of what I wanted to share today. In conclusion, I would say that the digital humanities bring two new things to the study of Japanese theater, which I hope became evident through my presentation. One is that it provides us with new ways to think about data and evidence, for example, by collecting information about what people are searching for on Google, but also new ways to communicate research results with the wider public. In some cases by developing these tangible user interfaces, but in some interactive open websites that anybody can use anywhere in the world to learn more about these extraordinary traditions. So with that, I reached the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, terima kasih. And I can be contacted through Twitter if anybody has any questions, but I hope that if you find these websites useful, that you will also go and visit them. Thank you very much. So that's it for my presentation. Again, thank you to the organizers. And I hope that I can interact with whoever is seeing this video at some point in the future in real life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Varela, for the presentation. There will be questions later. But now let me introduce the second speaker. She is Dr. Inaya Rahmani, who is an assistant professor and head of the International Communication class at the Department of Communication, Faculty of Science and Political Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. She is also the Director of Communications as well as member of the Indonesian Young Academy of Sciences. She has had 10 years experience in academic and applied research in higher education and social science research reform. Besides that, she also has played a role in the media in democratic processes. So now let's listen to her presentation, Ibu Dr. Inaya Rahmani.
Hi, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Inaya Rahmani. I'm from the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Indonesia. I'm here to present on digital media and Indonesian culture. as part of the 2020 Iconic Conference hosted by the Directorate General of Culture, Government of Indonesia, and the Faculty of Humanities, Universitas Indonesia. And before I begin, I'd like to give some context about how I see how I position digital media in the historical juncture we live in today. Globalization has intensified the movement of people and goods all over the world. And 10, 20 years into this situation, the global pandemic happened. The intensification of the spread of the virus posed some important questions towards how we organize our societies and how we are more interconnected, the consequences of how we've become more interconnected. And in certain contexts, the way the virus has reminded us of the kinds of social disconnects or the kind of social bonds that cannot be continued or need to be paused because people's work have shifted into their homes, and people need to keep their distances in public areas, reminds us that this is occurring in a time where our interconnectedness has actually become accelerated. And this kind of shift from our workspace into our home poses important questions as well about the kind of jobs that can survive COVID-19 and the kinds of jobs that can't. Some people who are in workers, especially who are in the manufacturing sector or manual labor, are either suspended or terminated because their jobs no longer exist, or they're forced to continue to be physically mobile despite times of social distancing. And this reminds us of the kind of hyper-competitiveness in the labor market in which the jobs and employments provided are limited compared to the amount of productive labor force. And this is actually a continuation of the withdrawal of the state in providing the basic necessities for human beings to live in the 21st century. And this we can see as well in the provision of health services, education, housing, water, etc. The basic goods that we need to survive in order to live have increasingly been permeated by the private sectors. And this happened because the increasing economic growth that we see in the global south come together with social inequalities, because much of this growth is felt by the upper layer of society, or what David Harvey calls the upward redistribution of wealth. This backdrop stands in contrast against what it means for us when, in times of the global pandemic, we universally suffer. Our movements are limited. We may become more disoriented because our work transcends space and time, despite our physical presence have become immobile. And the kind of precarity that is felt across classes, and the ways in which we universally suffer because massive testing, access to healthcare has become increasingly commercialized, and its access limited to the majority of people are universal, but how we specifically suffer is a matter of class position, a matter of gender, a matter of religion, a matter of ethnicity, race, etc. There are so many elements, social elements that goes into play in which we experience this kind of disconnect caused by or intensified by COVID. And this is the background within which I'd like to approach digital media, because digital media is one of the social tools that could either enable, hinder, smooth over, or grease the wheels that churn within our society. And if we look into social media narratives, including the formal government platforms, the Indonesian government states that there's 90% recovery for COVID and that we shouldn't panic. And this is consistently narrated through national platforms, digital national platforms. And this has been responded with criticism by civil society actors such as scientists, journalists, and activists, some of whom have experienced cyber attacks, experienced doxing or the revealing of private identities online of individuals, and also media organizations within the Alliance of Independent Journalists, for instance. And this tension between civil society and the state, or the way the government is carrying out policy response toward COVID in Indonesia, is in contrast with the kind of resilience that are happening on a community level. We can see kampung lockdowns, or the lockdown of neighborhood by civilians in Jakarta and Surabaya as early as March 2020. We can see upper class neighborhoods mobilizing charity towards the vicinity of their areas, such as the providing of sembako or the basic staples for those who have lost their jobs. And we can also see homemakers or women who, even before COVID, have experienced precarity and casualized contracts, and the sector within which they're part of is hardest hit by COVID, which is the care sector, such as hospitality and education, are now shifting into selling food online, which has been enabled by the digital market, because they are able to tap into social media platforms to promote their online products. And this has also caused the shortening of distribution channels for food and basic supplies. And this comes together with a kind of trust and social bonding that is amplified because consumers in their houses tend to purchase goods and foods from people that they trust. And at the same time, though, while there is this gap between media narratives, formal media narratives, and the kind of social resilience on a grassroots level, it shows the kind of social inequalities that are at play at home and also in public spaces, and also in the labor forces. The kind of social inequalities felt at home have gendered elements. For instance, mothers who play double roles or carries out double shifts at home now have to juggle work and their household duties within the same space, within the domestic space. And at certain times, their domestic space, by means of these Zoom video conferences, become publicized and mainstream into public arenas. So there's this gender elements of the kind of social inequalities in the household. At the same time, during this short crisis, some laws have been passed, and part of the economic recovery program that aligns with government responses towards COVID-19 that has increased precaritization, which also has been criticized by civil society elements. And what we see today, by means of taking the case of digital media narratives, and the way ordinary people uses digital spaces and markets to sustain their livelihoods, also demonstrate the kind of acceleration of upward redistribution through social media platforms. We see an increasing number of capital accumulation among US billionaires that own the largest platform or most popular platforms, such as Facebook and also Zoom. So we can see that while COVID has increased precarity, so this crisis in some ways have normalized capital accumulation and people not having equal opportunities in the labor market, because on a daily basis, they can find other ways to sustain their livelihoods by means of the digital market through social media platforms. And the ways forward, we can see that in the name of economic recovery, unfortunately, outsourced work and freelance work are present in the future. the only way that the government and corporates can sustain the economic shock brought by COVID-19 is through casualizing their workforce. And some laws have been passed to ensure this in Indonesia. And this, unfortunately, would exacerbate the kind of social inequalities that was present even before COVID-19. And the social elements that play into these social inequalities, such as gender, race, ethnicity, will continue to fragment societies based on identities. And who benefits from this process? It's the digital capitalists and corporates. And this poses the important question about how we can cope, or how we can manage as members of the society, be it academics, activists, or journalists. We need to have a common agenda in terms of how to carry out our society after COVID. And this includes a common agenda of wealth distribution, because those who are able to work from home have transitioned into the post-COVID economy, and those who are excluded from it will continue to experience labor precarity and scarcity of jobs after COVID, and are left to fend off for themselves. And this we can see in many of the narratives in digital media. At the same time, though, social media has formed a digital market space. We can see this in Tokopedia and Shopee, and we can see this in the more informal setting of Instagram, in which a platform not designed for online purchasing and e-commerce is being used to sell garments and food. This opens up new market spaces alongside digitalization, and this also poses an important question for the humanities who is being excluded, who is not able to access digital media, who is not able to be part of the digital market space, and also whether internet infrastructure in certain areas, especially in the regions, are excluded from accessing this market space because of the basic lack of internet infrastructure. And on the level of communities, we can see the resilience, or the ability to adapt to shocks, be it health shocks, social shocks, economic shocks, or natural shocks. Because as far as some communities have experienced, bureaucratic governance have failed them for long, ever since the neoliberalization of the economy. And they continue on their lives fending off for themselves because they have expectations on the government to provide them with services. And while this system, or the ability to survive, continues monetized by social media. And that's the end of my presentation. And thank you very much.
Baik, sekarang adalah sesi untuk question and answer atau pertanyaan yang bisa langsung ditujukan kepada masing-masing pembicara. Boleh langsung disampaikan di Q&A chat ya. Pada saat ini sudah ada satu pertanyaan, saya tidak disebutkan kepada siapa, tapi saya kira ini ditujukan kepada Dr. Varela ya. I'm going to read the question here. Hello, I'm from Cirebon. I'm still a family member of the Cirebonan version of shadow puppetry, to be more precise in the village of Gegesik. Well, in this area of mine, still adheres to classical arts, and it can be said that refusing technological progress and modernization progress to develop. I personally do Cirebon mask dance, and I personally, as a millennial, want all of these to develop, following progress, but without losing the classics. How did you start to change classical wayang into contemporary, and how the older artists responded there? Dr. Varela?
So yeah, thank you very much for the question, and yeah, salam buat teman-teman di Gagasik Cirebon. So I think this is fascinating. I think actually it's a question that I have that I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer, because this is really something for the artists themselves to decide. I see myself more as a researcher. So I would be more interested in what people like you who come from the tradition think about this. One thing I try to do in my work is to keep track of all the possible answers to this question. And one of the reasons why I'm fascinated by contemporary wayang is because there's no single one-size-fits-all answer. So I think every artist has their own response to what they want to keep from the tradition and what they want to do differently. And in some ways, I think that also reflects society at large, that a lot of people have similar questions. They want to decide, what do you keep from your own tradition in daily life, and what do you integrate from digital media? So I believe that if you go to the websites that I shared, you will see that the range of wayang contemporary performers don't agree on this answer. For some of them, what's important to keep is the music. For some of them, you can change everything, but the ethical values need to be kept. And for me, to see that variety is absolutely fascinating. So I'm looking forward to what you yourself, Mas Bagus Erlangga, decide to do on this project.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Varela. Thank you. Is there any other question from the other participants? Here there is, there's somebody send you greeting from Professor Nyoman Sedana, PhD. Oh. Thank you for this event. Thank you, our pleasure, Professor Nyoman Sedana. And then there is another question, again to Dr. Varela, from Iswari Lawanda. The material is such triggering. Would you mind please share the method used in collecting data in your project? How can you make the links to resources, Dr. Varela?
Sure. So I would say that there are two parts of my method. One of them is ethnographic, which means that I've spent a lot of time in Java, looking at many different performances, traveling with different artists, talking to sponsors, talking to spectators. So I think, as we say, nongkrong, to kind of just chatting informally with people is an essential method for this kind of work. I'm not from Indonesia, so I'm interested in how people themselves talk about the tradition, about cultural change, about what matters. So that would be the first part of the method. And the second one is designing interfaces that can communicate this to the public, because I don't want this to be just for the academics, but also to be online so other people can learn about this, about the amazing work that the Langs do in Java. So for that work, usually what I do is I trial things. I make a sample of a website, then I show it to a few people, and then I get feedback, and then based on that, I try to improve on that. So I'm going to paste my links here. In many cases, I also have links to other resources where I explain how these websites were made. The code also for these websites is available on my website if anybody wants to reproduce the kinds of things that I've done. So, well, thank you again for your interest, and I will just paste that into the panel chat.
Okay, thank you. So there will be the link typed by Dr. Varela on the chat box, yeah? And then there is a question to both of the speakers from Ibu Safira Mustakila. Both topics are so interesting. First question, how to maintain the traditional of wayang in the mid of the digital era? Is it effective if we combine the traditional arts such as wayang to modern music, like the song of Lati? What do you think about that? So I think it would be to Dr. Varela. Yeah? The second question would be, how effectively the distance education by online system in your opinion, and both for the negative and positive side, that would be to Dr. Inaya Rahmani. So Dr. Varela, would you please answer the first question?
Well, so just very briefly, I think that the tradition will survive in the digital era. If you look at the history of wayang kulit, people have said for at least 200 years that the form will disappear. So even in the 19th century, there are people who described it as a minor form that will soon disappear. And then it has faced many challenges, sometimes political challenges, sometimes cultural challenges. When television first appeared, people said that television will destroy wayang, but actually it created dalang superstars. So then some dalangs became extremely well known because of television. And then with social media, many of them took to YouTube. They have their own channels with thousands of followers on social media. And now even with the pandemic, many, like, as we know from Dr. Inaya Rahmani's presentation, it has impacted society in many ways, but the traditional artists have found ways to continue doing performances without an audience and just on YouTube. So I think that people are really creative, and the artists are finding new ways to solve these challenges. So I'm more interested in what people say. Now, when it comes to the controversies like the Lati song, I think I refrain from giving my own opinion because I'm more interested in the different sides of the controversies. So I'm interested in what the different people say about it and how different groups see culture rather than trying to resolve. I think my role is more to be the one who makes a chronicle of this debate rather than somebody who solves it. But thank you for these fascinating questions.
Yeah, thank you for the response, Dr. Varela. Now, I would like to ask Ibu Inaya Rahmani to respond to the second question regarding the effectiveness of distance education, both for the negative and positive sides.
Thank you, Dr. Vera, also Dr. Miguel. Regarding distance education and how effective it is when it's transitioned online, I think there's always contradictions in any social conditions. On one hand, I really admire the resilience with which dalang can move into digital spaces and morph together with digital media, and that's really commendable. Very sorry, my internet connection dropped. And on the other hand, these kind of resilience by the dalangs who have successfully shifted into digital spaces are able to exist without support from the government and public funding. So if we relate this to the condition in which teaching, online learning and teaching are carried out, we can see that those successful cases exist because of the kind of resilience that people are able to practice. Those who have ethnographic insights into everyday life are able to adjust, for instance, in the case of state universities in Indonesia and public universities, because inequalities are awareness regarding inequalities exists among the lecturers. When some students need to return home to their remote areas in their minds, when they organize classroom activities, they are aware that those areas might not have internet connection. And this redistribution of access needs to be managed by the lecturers and the students as peers in each classroom. However, without those awareness, because it doesn't yet exist in systematic policymaking from the government, these kinds of inequalities can be reproduced through the exclusion of students coming from disenfranchised or marginalized backgrounds to access these education in spite of them being enrolled as students. This is on top of the already limited access to public and state higher education to those coming from underprivileged backgrounds. So it's a complex social process, and I would like to advocate for social awareness and social practices among lecturers actually and activists in digital spaces to use the most basic and minimum bandwidth connection for any online learning so that we don't reproduce the kind of exclusionary practices that exist in public spaces. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Inaya. Let us continue with the next question from Bapak Nyoman Sedana. I think this could be also addressed by the two speakers later. Yeah, the question is, what is the prospect of enhancing wayang literacy and appreciation in the Indonesian higher education? I would like to invite Dr. Varela first to give some response.
So I think this is, of course, a very complicated question that I think should be, Iniwan Sedana, of course, extremely well known, is somebody who would be at the, at a place where, that can really shape this discussion. I would say that, there is an incredible range of experiments of traditional performances happening in Indonesia that not everyone is always aware of. So I think that it is definitely a challenge. What I see as my role is creating these web resources for younger people that didn't grow up in the tradition. So often what happens is that people learn how to watch traditional performances because they've watched them since they were kids. And then if you didn't grow up in the tradition, it becomes quite difficult. So in doing these websites, we try to make it a bit easier for newcomers to the tradition. One thing I must say, though, is that the majority of my websites are in English. Some of them have content in Indonesian as well, but this is aimed more at the students, for example, in the case of Singapore and other places where there is a lot of interest in what is happening in Indonesia and elsewhere in Southeast Asia. I think that the challenges that people face in Indonesia are slightly different, but there's also an enormous range of creativity in the lecturers, in the institutions, and we try to collaborate as much as possible with the institutions there. So that's something that we are always happy to do, and I think that the different School of the Arts and the different universities in Indonesia are also doing incredible work on teaching tradition at the higher education level.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Valera. I would like to invite Ibu Inaya, please, Dr. Inaya.
How to preserve and maintain local wisdom. I think it should be mainstream, and urban and modern society should gain deep insight from the kind of storytelling and the kind of myth and folklore able to inherit or leave behind to the next generation about an imagination about history, about life beyond hundreds of years to hundreds of years, because with that, I think, comes deep respect to the past and ability to face the future without short-sightedness. So I think maintaining local wisdom is not to benefit, not only to benefit the Dalang and the followers, but also to benefit members of modern society losing grasp in their cultural roots and history.
Thank you very much, Dr. Inaya. There is one question for our session today, which is to Dr. Varela again. Is there any categorization or differentiation on subject or theme played by contemporary wayang compared to traditional wayang?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've always found fascinating about wayang, and that's something that also fascinates a lot of people, is that the repertoire of stories is relatively limited, but people have found many different ways in which they can reinterpret the stories for different contexts. So this is something that we see even from very old performances that we have a record of, that the artists can use it for their own means. So there are these subtle ways in which you can take a story and make it be a commentary on, for example, the political situation, but in a very subtle way, or it can be about specific people in the audience. The difference with the contemporary wayang is that they make that more explicit. So whereas in the traditional, this connection to the contemporary world tends to be more allegorical or done through humor, in some of the shows, you will see that the artists are using stories that are not from the Purvo stories, not from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, but sometimes they're taking narratives that are inspired from cinema, or they are taking things that are from the headlines. And I think that again, you see that diversity, that you have, they're not constrained to one type of story and not constrained to one way of presenting the story. So in the website, you will see also how this difference, how it plays out in the hands of this range of extraordinary artists.
Thank you for the response, Dr. Varela. So now we have come to the last part of the first plenary session. We have listened to two wonderful speakers, and the topics have been very insightful. So now I think, because if there is, no, I don't think there is another question, but I think if there is another question, it could be sent directly to the two speakers. Yeah, thank you very much for this very productive and very fruitful discussion today. So I would like to end the session. Thank you for all of your participants. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you.
And Sobat Iconic, that was the end of Plenary Session 1, dan terima kasih kepada Ibu Vera Syamsi yang sudah memandu sebagai moderator pada Plenary Session pertama, dan terima kasih kembali maksud saya kepada Ibu Inaya Rahmani dan Mr. Miguel Escobar Varela. Thank you very much, dan Sobat Iconic masih semangat kayaknya mengikuti acara yang selanjutnya, karena setelah ini kita akan melanjutkan dengan panel session. Nah, ada info untuk Sobat Iconic supaya bisa join panel session pertama. Sobat Iconic bisa mengunjungi official Instagram dari Iconic, yaitu @iconicculture.id. Saya ulangi sekali lagi, Sobat Iconic bisa mengunjungi official Instagram account @iconicculture.id. Nah, di situ Sobat Iconic bisa mengakses link yang tersedia pada official Instagram account atau akun Instagram dari Iconic Culture. Di situ sudah ada postingan yang berisi link-link yang Sobat Iconic bisa langsung kunjungi. Nah, ada info tambahan juga untuk Sobat Iconic bahwa panel room nanti ini akan berlangsung bersamaan. Jadi setiap panel room dengan beberapa presenter yang sudah dibagi dalam beberapa grup akan berlangsung secara bersamaan. Jadi Sobat Iconic bisa memilih room yang ingin diikuti tadi ya, dengan cara mengakses link yang sudah dicantumkan di Instagram @iconicculture. Ya, Sobat Iconic jangan lupa untuk nanti juga mengikuti plenary kedua yang akan berlangsung siang hari ini juga mengenai jalur rempah. Jadi setelah panel session ini jangan lupa untuk mengikuti juga plenary session yang kedua. Jadi silahkan mengikuti linknya. Selamat jumpa.